The door creaked ominously through the house that fateful night. Thomas, a middle-aged man with piercing gray eyes, stormed into Leia's room. His heavy footsteps echoed against the hardwood floors, mirroring the emotional tempest within him. 16-year-old Leia, with her golden curls and blue eyes, sat frozen on her bed, her face etched with anxiety. Her trembling hands held her report card. The air grew thick with tension as Thomas snatched the paper from her hands. His eyes blazed with anger as they scanned the grades, stopping at the C in mathematics. His face reddened with rage, the veins in his neck bulging as he shouted, "AC? Do you understand how this affects your chances of getting into a good college? I didn't raise my daughter to be ordinary." Leia fought back tears as she tried to explain. "Dad, please. I tried my best." "The new teacher." Thomas brutally interrupted her, pointing at her while speaking. "I don't want to hear excuses. You've wasted your potential. I won't allow this under my education." He yanked her clothes from the closet, throwing them into an open suitcase on the floor. Leia stood up, trying to stop him. Her words came out in broken fragments. "Please, Dad. Don't do this. I can work harder. I can improve," she pleaded. But Thomas had lost all reason. His frantic movements reflected years of unmet expectations and frustrated dreams projected onto his only daughter. As he roughly zipped the suitcase shut, he muttered in a cold, sharp voice, "You had your chance. Now you'll learn that in the real world, failure has consequences." Thomas grabbed Leia's arm in a sudden movement. As he dragged her down the stairs, Leia struggled to keep up with his long strides, her mind spinning with fear and disbelief. At the front door, Thomas threw Leia's suitcase onto the rain-dampened sidewalk. Leia's heart raced as she made one final, desperate plea. "Dad, please. Don't do this. I have nowhere to go," she begged, her face wet with rain and tears. Thomas responded with eyes cold as stone. "This will teach you the value of hard work and excellence. Don't come back until you're worthy of this family's name." The door slammed shut with a thunderous sound, leaving Leia alone in the dark, cold street. She stood there frozen, as the reality of her situation slowly sank in while the rain mingled with her tears. The world seemed to spin around her as the lights from neighboring houses blurred in her vision. With trembling legs, Leia lifted her suitcase and began walking aimlessly down the street. Her thoughts were a chaotic mixture of fear, anger, and sorrow. In a small voice nearly drowned out by the rain, she whispered to herself, "How could he do this? I'm his daughter. Am I such a disappointment?" As she moved further from the only home she had ever known, the gravity of her situation weighed heavily on her shoulders. With no money and nowhere to stay, the dark sky threatened an even fiercer storm. Her steps were unsteady as she made her way to a nearby park. There, she finally collapsed onto a wet bench, clutching her suitcase like a shield. Her tears flowed freely, mixing with the rain that soaked her clothes. Between sobs, Leia spoke into the empty night. "What am I going to do now? How can I survive alone?" Only distant thunder answered her, symbolizing her uncertain future and the abrupt end of her childhood. 7 years after that fateful night, a sharp phone ring shattered the silence of Leia's small apartment. At 24, she was hardened by experience, yet her blue eyes still held compassion. She hesitated before answering the phone. Her thoughts drifted momentarily to Samantha, the kind stranger who had found her shivering in the rain that night and offered her a home. Samantha, who had been both an advisor and a motherly figure, passed away 3 months ago, leaving a painful emptiness in her heart. Leia took a deep breath, pushing aside the pain of recent loss, and answered the phone. Her Aunt Tanya's familiar voice sounded tired and worried. "Leia, it's about your father. He's in the hospital. He's very sick, and the doctors say he doesn't have much time," her aunt said over the phone. Leia felt the world spinning around her. Her emotions swung between shock, anger, and unexpected pangs of concern. Taking a deep breath, trying to find her voice, she finally answered. "Tanya, I don't know what to say. After everything that happened, I truly hope he recovers. Despite what he did to me, I don't wish him ill. Samantha, the woman who took me in, taught me that forgiveness is the purest form of love. But that doesn't mean I have to stay in painful situations. He hurt me terribly. I don't know what to do," Leah confessed. She asked her aunt for the hospital's location, though she wasn't sure if she wanted to visit. Leah hung up the phone. Her heart was confused by feelings that contradicted her memories. She walked to the small apartment window and gazed out at the city that had been her sanctuary for the past 7 years. The building lights twinkled like distant stars, reminding her of countless nights spent fighting to survive and redefine herself after her father's cruel rejection. Catching her reflection in the glass, she saw not only the strong woman she had become but also the frightened girl abandoned in the rain years ago. Leah sighed heavily and whispered, "All these years, he never tried to find me. Why now? Why when he's dying?" With a resolve to face her past, Leah began packing a small bag. Her movements were mechanical and hesitant. Each piece of clothing she packed felt heavy as lead, weighted with memories of life before and after that fateful night. She paused for a moment and picked up an old photograph she had kept hidden. It was a picture of her and Thomas from happier times. As she traced her father's face with her finger, anger and nostalgia welled up in her chest. Leah spoke quietly to the photograph, her voice thick with emotion. "Dad, you took everything from me. My home, my family, my sense of security. But I won't let you take my humanity." As she drove to the hospital, Leah felt the weight of 7 years' absence bearing down on her shoulders. The familiar streets of her hometown passed by in a blur, each corner awakening memories she had tried so hard to suppress. The hospital parking lot felt like a swirling pool of anxiety and tension. Each step toward the main entrance tested her resolve. At the reception desk, Leah hesitated. Her hand hung suspended above the counter. As the receptionist watched her expectantly, Leah finally found her voice. "I'm here to see Thomas Miller. I'm his daughter." The words sounded strange to her ears, as if they belonged to someone else's life, not her own anymore. The corridor leading to Thomas's room seemed to stretch endlessly. Leah could feel her heart pounding fiercely in her chest. Each step echoed like a distant drum in her ears. Finally reaching the door, she stopped. Her hand trembled as it touched the cold doorknob. For a moment, she considered fleeing from this confrontation that might reopen old wounds. But something inside her, perhaps the same strength that had sustained her all these years, pushed her forward. Taking a deep breath, Leah opened the door. The sound of machines filled the air. Her eyes fixed on the frail figure lying in the bed. In the sterile hospital room, Leah stood before the fragile figure of her father, a stark contrast to the imposing man who had once cast her out into the cold night. Her voice trembled with a mix of determination and long-buried pain as she broke the heavy silence. "Hello, Dad. I'm here," she whispered to his unconscious form, her words carrying years of unspoken emotions. "I know there's a lot we need to talk about. I'm ready to listen, and I want to understand. I want you to heal, even if you've made mistakes in the past." Leah remained standing by Thomas's bedside, studying his pale, weathered face that seemed to have aged decades in their years apart. The rhythmic beeping of medical machines pierced the stillness, a constant reminder of her father's fragile hold on life. Before she could fully process the gravity of her words, the door opened, revealing Dr. Davis, a distinguished middle-aged physician with concern etched deeply in his features. After brief introductions, he began examining the monitors and Thomas's charts with practiced precision. Leah watched his every movement like a hawk, her heart racing whenever his brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, Dr. Davis turned to her, his voice carrying the weight of years of delivering difficult news. "Ms. Miller, I'm afraid we need to discuss your father's condition. He's been diagnosed with an extremely rare and aggressive form of kidney disease. The words hit Leah like a physical blow, leaving her gasping for air. Rare? Aggressive? The terms echoed in her mind like ominous bells. I don't understand, she managed to whisper. Dr. Davis continued, his sympathetic eyes never leaving her face. The disease is progressing rapidly, and his kidneys are failing. We need to perform a transplant immediately. Leah felt the room spin beneath her feet, steadying herself against the hospital bed. Time is of the essence, Ms. Miller, the doctor continued gravely. Without a swift transplant, your father's chances of survival are limited. Leah gazed at Thomas's vulnerable form. This broken man who bore little resemblance to the authoritarian figure who had banished her from his life. Turning to Dr. Davis, her voice shaking but resolute, she asked, "What do I need to do?" "I'll do anything to help." Dr. Davis nodded with a gentle smile of approval. "Your dedication is admirable, Ms. Miller. The first step is compatibility testing. Being a close blood relative significantly increases our chances of finding a suitable donor." The next few hours passed in a blur of needles, test tubes, and endless paperwork. Leah barely felt the pain of the needles as her blood was drawn again and again. Her mind was focused solely on the possibility of saving her father's life. While waiting for the results, she returned to Thomas's room and sat by his bedside. As she watched his sleeping face, Leah finally allowed herself to cry for everything that had happened, tears she had held back for years finally flowing freely. Silent tears traced paths down her cheeks as she whispered into the sterile hospital air. "Why did everything change, Dad? How did we end up here?" she questioned, her voice barely audible above the steady hum of medical equipment. The room's silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of machines, offered no answers to her heart's desperate questions. Dr. Davis's return interrupted Leah's moment of reflection, and she quickly rose to her feet, bracing herself for the test results. The doctor held a stack of papers, his expression carefully neutral in that way only seasoned physicians can master. "Ms. Miller, we've analyzed the compatibility test results," he began, his measured tone carrying decades of experience in delivering life-changing news. Leah held her breath as her heart pounded fiercely in her chest. Dr. Davis continued with careful precision, "You're a perfect match for your father. In fact, it's the best compatibility I've seen in all my years of practice." The waves of relief and fear simultaneously swept over Leah, leaving her with a sense of instability. She glanced at Thomas's still unconscious form before turning her attention back to the doctor. "What exactly does this mean, doctor? What happens now?" With a voice both kind and resolute, Dr. Davis explained the risks and procedures involved in the transplant. "The decision is yours, Ms. Miller. Without this transplant, his chances are virtually zero. However, like any major surgery, there are risks for both parties involved." Leah remained silent for a long moment, her gaze moving between her father's ashen face and the doctor's concerned expression. Her mind drifted to Samantha, remembering her lessons about forgiveness and compassion. She remembered that cold night when she was cast out, the pain and loneliness she'd faced. And there she was, before her lay an opportunity for redemption. Not just for her father, but for them both. With a deep breath that seemed to draw strength from her very soul, Leah squared her shoulders and met the doctor's gaze. Her voice rang clear and steady as she spoke, "I'll do it, doctor. Not because of what he did in the past, but because this is what you do for someone in need." "When can we begin?" Dr. Davis nodded, an admiring smile crossing his face. "Your courage is inspiring, Ms. Miller. We'll begin preparations immediately. If everything goes well, we can perform the surgery tomorrow morning." As the doctor left to make arrangements, Leah turned her attention back to Thomas. Taking his cold hand in hers, she whispered, "I'm giving you a second chance, Dad. Use it to learn how to treat the people who love you." Word of Leia's decision spread quickly, reaching her Aunt Tanya, who had been waiting anxiously in the hospital lobby. When Leia entered the waiting area, Tanya jumped to her feet, her face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. "Leia, honey. Are you really going to donate your kidney to Thomas?" Tanya's voice trembled with disbelief and concern. Leia nodded calmly, preparing herself for her aunt's reaction. Tanya stepped forward, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she struggled to contain her emotions. "Oh, Leia. You don't have to donate a kidney, especially after everything he's done to you in the past," her aunt said emotionally. Leia took a deep breath, searching for the right words to make her aunt understand. "Aunt Tanya, I know this is hard to understand, but this is my decision. I'm not doing it for the past, I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do." Tanya shook her head, clearly distraught, and began pacing the small room, wringing her hands nervously. "This is madness, Leia. Thomas threw you out like yesterday's trash, and now you're willing to risk your life for him?" Tanya's voice rose with years of pent-up resentment toward her brother's actions. Leia stood firm, her voice calm but filled with quiet determination. "I understand your concern, Aunt Tanya, but this is my choice. I'm not asking for approval, I just need you to respect my decision." She paused, meeting her aunt's eyes steadily. "Dad made mistakes, yes, but I would do this for anyone who needed it." Leia's words echoed through the room, seeming to trigger something primal in Tanya. Her aunt whirled around, fixing her with a look that was equal parts admiration and frustration. "Leia, you don't have to keep carrying this burden. I wish I could have done more back then, but I was living in another state. By the time I found out, it was too late. He abandoned you when you needed him most. How can you forgive and forget so easily?" Remembering that rainy night brought a flash of pain, but Leia maintained her composure. She moved closer to Tanya, speaking in a clear, steady voice. "I haven't forgotten, Aunt Tanya, but I refuse to let the past define me. Samantha taught me that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's choosing to be better than what hurt us." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I'm doing this not just for my father, but for myself as well. I want to prove that I can become the person I choose to be, rather than being shaped by my circumstances." The tension between the two women was palpable, their expressions tight with emotion. Tanya struggled to understand, gesturing for Leia to sit down. As they settled into the uncomfortable waiting room chairs, Tanya broke the silence. Her voice was softer now, but still laden with worry and concern. "What if something goes wrong, sweetheart? What if you regret it? Have you thought about the consequences?" Leia felt the weight of those questions, but found strength in Samantha's memory. She answered with a gentle smile. "Life is full of uncertainties, Aunt Tanya, but I think I'd regret not trying more. Samantha taught me that our choices define us, and I choose compassion." She took her aunt's hand, squeezing it gently. "I know it's hard to understand, but I need you to respect my decision. I'm not asking you to agree. Just to support me." The hours that followed were an emotional roller coaster for both women. Tanya oscillated between moments of awe at Leia's courage and deep concern for her well-being. When she finally found her composure, she moved closer to Leia, speaking in a low, hesitant voice. "Leia, while I may not fully understand, I admire your strength. I just need to know. Are you doing this for yourself, or out of some twisted sense of obligation?" Leia took her aunt's hand, squeezing it gently with reassurance. "Thank you for caring, Aunt Tanya. I'll be fine. I have to be." She paused, a bittersweet smile playing across her lips. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm at peace with my choice. And I'm hoping for the best. That alone makes it worthwhile." As night descended and exhaustion crept over them both, Leia felt a curious mixture of fatigue and determination. Tomorrow would be a new day. One that could change everything. With that thought, she closed her eyes, preparing herself for what lay ahead. She felt grateful for her aunt's comforting presence beside her. Night had settled over the hospital, casting long shadows down the quiet corridors. Though exhausted from hours of preparation and preoperative tests, Leia made her way back to Thomas's room for one final visit before tomorrow morning's surgery. The room was dimly lit, with only the faint glow of monitors breaking through the darkness. Leia approached the bed, her hesitant footsteps echoing in the silence. She observed her father's pale face, marked by years of hardship and illness. Suddenly, Thomas's eyes flickered open. Slowly focusing on the shadowy figure beside his bed, his voice came out hoarse and weak, breaking the silence. Who's there? Leia felt her heart rate quicken as a rush of emotions filled her. It's me, Dad. Leia, she answered softly, leaning forward so he could see her better. Thomas blinked several times, his confused gaze studying Leia's face. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but uncertainty lingered there too. Leia. But how? Why are you here? His voice trembled with anxiety and confusion. Leia took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. I'm here to help you, Dad. You're sick, but you're going to get better. She hesitated for a moment before continuing. Tomorrow, I'm going to help make you well again. Thomas frowned, struggling to comprehend. Surgery? What kind of surgery? Leia felt a lump form in her throat as she struggled to explain the gravity of what was about to happen. At that moment, Dr. Davis entered the room, surprise registering on his face at seeing Thomas awake. He quickly approached, checking his patient's vital signs and mental clarity. Mr. Miller, I'm glad to see you're awake. How are you feeling? Thomas, still confused, looked back and forth between the doctor and Leia. I don't know. What's happening, doctor? Dr. Davis shot Leia a quick glance before answering. Mr. Miller, you have a severe kidney disease. Your daughter Leia has offered to be a donor. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The doctor's words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, heavy with meaning. Thomas's reaction was immediate and fierce. His eyes widened, and a mix of shock and horror spread across his weathered face. No, absolutely not. He tried to sit up, the movement weak but filled with determination. I won't allow this. Leia, you can't do this. It's too dangerous, he insisted. But Leia stepped forward, trying to calm her father. Dad, please, calm down. I want to do this. I've already made my decision, she asserted. But Thomas wasn't listening to her words. He turned to Dr. Davis, his voice frantic yet gaining strength. Doctor, cancel the surgery. I refuse to put my daughter's life at risk. I'd rather die than let her do this for me. The room descended into chaos. Dr. Davis attempted to calm Thomas while Leia stood shaken by her father's reaction. Nurses rushed in, trying to assess the situation. Leia took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. Dad, please. Listen to me. She moved to his bedside, speaking in a voice that was gentle yet firm. This is my choice. Not just for you, but for me too. Thomas shook his head violently. Tears welled up in his eyes. Don't you understand, Leia? I did terrible things to you. I ruined your life. And I won't take anything more from you. The room fell silent for a moment. Leia took Thomas's hand, holding it gently in her own. Dad, you didn't ruin my life. Yes, that night was painful, but it made me stronger. I built my own life, and now I'm choosing, of my own free will, to help you. Dr. Davis intervened carefully. Mr. Miller, your daughter's decision is a brave one. While there are risks, the chances of success are very good. Thomas sighed deeply, like a child. His eyes were filled with regret and fear. Leia, I don't even deserve to ask for forgiveness. I hurt you, abandoned you. How can you risk your life for a father like me? Leah was touched by her father's words. She placed her hand gently on his cheek, meeting his eyes. Dad, we can't change the past, but we can change the future. This is a chance for a new beginning. For both of us. An emotional silence filled the room. Tears welled up in Thomas's eyes and rolled down his cheeks. His trembling hand reached for Leah's. You're so much stronger than I am, Leah. I don't deserve a daughter like you. Leah smiled gently. Dad, this isn't about deserving. We're family, and families help each other. Dr. Davis cleared his throat softly. I'm sorry, but we need to proceed with the surgery preparations. Mr. Miller, do we have your consent? Thomas remained silent for a long moment. His eyes searched Leah's face, looking for any sign of doubt. Finally, he gave a small nod. If this is truly what you want. But promise me, Leah. If anything goes wrong, they'll stop immediately. Leah smiled with relief. I promise, Dad. But we'll be fine. We'll both get through this. Dr. Davis began moving efficiently. He gave instructions to the nurses and made final preparations. Leah remained by her father's side, holding his hand tightly. As dawn approached, the hospital bustled with surgical preparations. Leah and Thomas faced the new morning with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety about what was to come. A long and difficult road might lie ahead of them. But in this moment, they had found a glimmer of reconciliation and hope. It was a promise of a new beginning and a chance to reclaim the time they had lost. While Dr. Davis attempted to explain the risks and benefits of the surgery, Leah desperately tried to make her father understand her choice. But Thomas remained unyielding, his voice trembling with years of bottled-up regret. Don't you understand, Leah? I don't deserve this, considering what I did to you, he said, staring at his trembling hands. I threw you out, abandoned you when you needed me most. How can you even think of risking your life for me now? Hot tears rolled down Leah's cheeks, but her voice remained as steady as a lighthouse in a storm. Daddy, this isn't about deserving that, it's about forgiveness and second chances, she spoke with the wisdom Samantha, her surrogate mother, had instilled in her. Sometimes showing compassion, even when holding on to bitterness would be easier, is the bravest thing we can do. She took her father's trembling hands and gently wrapped them in hers with tenderness. Please, let me do this, not just for you, but for us both. To heal not just your body, but the wounds between us. The silence that followed hung heavy in the air like storm clouds before rain, their future balanced on the knife edge of Thomas's decision. When Thomas finally broke the silence, his voice was as hard and cold as winter frost. No, Leah. My decision is final, he turned to Dr. Davis, his pale face a stark contrast to the fierce determination in his eyes. Doctor, I refuse this surgery. I will not allow my daughter to risk her life for me. Leah felt the ground disappear beneath her feet, as if she were standing on the edge of a bottomless chasm. Daddy, please reconsider. This isn't just about you, she pleaded, her heart breaking all over again. But Thomas wouldn't yield. With strength that seemed to surge from somewhere deep within, he pushed himself up in the hospital bed and pointed to the door. Get out, Leah. I don't want you here. I don't want your sacrifice. Leave now, his voice echoed through the room like thunder, charged with a mixture of anger and fear. Leah stumbled backward, stunned as if struck. Through the tears streaming down her face, she stared at her father in disbelief. Daddy, you can't do this. You can't push me away again, her voice cracked like thin ice. But Thomas remained adamant, his face set in stone. I said get out. I won't be responsible for risking your life. I made that mistake once. Never again. Dr. Davis tried to intervene, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. Mr. Miller, I think we should all calm down and discuss this rationally, he suggested diplomatically. But his words were cut short by a cry of pain from Thomas that pierced the air like a knife. Suddenly, the heart monitor erupted into a frenzied chorus of alarms, its steady rhythm dissolving into chaos. Thomas clutched his chest, his face contorting in agony like a mask of pain. "Daddy!" Leia cried out, rushing to his bedside as if pulled by an invisible force. Dr. Davis sprang into action with practiced efficiency, his voice sharp and clear over the intercom as he called for the emergency team. In the blink of an eye, the room was filled with nurses and doctors, their movements resembling a desperate dance filled with determination to stabilize Thomas. Leia found herself pushed into a corner, forced to watch helplessly as the medical team fought to save her father's life. Fragments of urgent conversation reached her ears like shards of broken glass. "Blood pressure dropping, kidney function failing, we need to act now." Through the chaos, Leia felt a steel-like resolve crystallizing within her soul. She approached Dr. Davis, who was overseeing the emergency procedures, her voice trembling but filled with unwavering determination. "Doctor," she said, "please, do the surgery now." "I know," he refused, "but he'll die if we do nothing." Dr. Davis looked at her intently, his eyes clouded with visible doubt. "Leia, you understand this goes against the patient's explicit wishes? There are protocols, ethical considerations," he argued, his voice heavy with professional concern. But Leia cut through his words like a sharp blade through silk. "I understand, doctor, but I also know my father is dying." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "He's in no condition to make this decision now. Please, I'm begging you, save his life. I'll take full responsibility." Dr. Davis stood silent for a moment, the weight of the decision evident in every line of his face. His gaze moved from Thomas, unconscious and fighting for life, back to Leia, whose eyes burned with determination and love. Finally, he nodded slowly, like a man accepting a sacred trust. "Understood, Leia. Let's proceed with the surgery. But you do understand the risks and potential legal consequences, right?" he explained in a grave voice. Leia nodded quickly, relief and fear washing over her like waves on a shore. "I understand, doctor." "Thank you." As the medical team prepared for emergency surgery, Leia approached her father's bed one last time. Leaning down, she whispered in his ear, her words soft as a prayer. "Fight, Daddy. I'm not giving up on you, no matter how hard you push me away. We're going to get through this together." With those words, she was led away to prepare for surgery, the future uncertain but her resolve unshakable as a mountain. Minutes later, the hospital's surgical center bustled with activity as they prepared Leia for surgery. Nurses moved around her with swift precision, checking vital signs and adjusting equipment like a well-choreographed ballet. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled the air, mingling with the palpable tension that hung like a heavy curtain. She took deep breaths as they transferred her to the operating table, trying to calm her racing nerves. Her eyes swept the room, absorbing every detail like a photograph, the bright lights overhead, the quietly blinking monitors, the medical team preparing with mechanical precision. Dr. Davis approached, his kind eyes meeting hers above his surgical mask. "Ready, Leia?" he asked gently, his voice warm as a summer breeze. Leia nodded, her voice steady despite the fear threatening to swallow her whole. "I'm ready, doctor. Let's begin." As the anesthesiologist approached with the mask, Leia closed her eyes, allowing herself one final moment of reflection. Images from her life flashed through her mind like scenes from an old movie. The night she was cast out, years of struggle and triumph, Samantha's gentle face. She thought of her father, fighting for his life in the next room. A fierce determination grew within her, stronger than any fear. "This is bigger than just us, Daddy. It's about forgiveness and second chances," she thought to herself. The anesthesiologist's gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. "Count backward from 10 for me," he requested softly. And so she began, her voice unwavering. 10, 9, 8. As the numbers descended, Leia felt consciousness slipping away like sand through her fingers. The world around her dissolved into a misty darkness. The surgery began with Dr. Davis directing his team with calm efficiency. Every movement was calculated and precise, like a delicate dance. The operating room silence was broken only by the steady beeping of monitors and occasional whispered instructions. As the procedure progressed, tension in the room mounted like a rising tide. Everyone was acutely aware of the risks, knowing this surgery was crucial not just for Thomas, but for Leah as well. The kidney was carefully extracted, each vessel and tissue handled with the utmost care. When the organ was finally removed, a collective sigh of relief whispered through the room. Dr. Davis gazed at the kidney in his hands, a symbol of Leah's ultimate sacrifice. Remarkable. A pure act of selfless love, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. As the team prepared to transport the kidney to Thomas's waiting room, Leah lay silent on the operating table, lost in the depths of anesthesia. Nurses moved with precise, careful movements to close the incision, their actions as delicate as artists at work. Soon, Leah's kidney was carried away with the hope of giving Thomas a second chance at life. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the first sensation that greeted Leah as she emerged from anesthesia. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the soft light of the recovery room. She blinked several times, trying to bring the blurred world into focus. A nurse noticed her stirring and quickly approached to check her vital signs. "Welcome back, Leah. How are you feeling?" the nurse asked with a gentle smile that reminded her of morning sunshine. Leah tried to speak but found her throat as dry as desert sand. The nurse offered ice chips, which Leah accepted gratefully. After a moment, Leah finally managed to whisper, "I'm alive." "That's a start." The nurse smiled warmly at the young woman's indomitable spirit. In the hours that followed, Leah amazed the medical team with her remarkably swift recovery. Determined to get moving, she ignored the pain in her abdomen and attempted to sit up in bed just hours after surgery. Dr. Davis walked in during his rounds just as Leah was making her attempt. "Whoa there, Superwoman," he said, rushing to help her, his voice a mixture of concern and admiration. Leah winced in pain, but her eyes sparkled with pure determination. "Doctor, the sooner I get up, the faster I'll recover, right?" she asked, her voice hopeful as a spring morning. The doctor couldn't suppress his smile. "Your tenacity and willpower are remarkable, Leah, but we need to balance that with your body's need to heal. Let's make a deal, rest today, and tomorrow we'll start with light exercises." Leah reluctantly agreed, but her spirit remained undefeated like a mountain standing against the wind. She peppered the nurses and doctors with questions about her and her father's recovery, absorbing every detail about the healing process and post-operative care. Yet none of them would speak about his condition, carefully avoiding the topic to spare her worry. Her Aunt Tanya, who came to visit, was struck by Leah's positive attitude. "How can you be so energetic when you've just had major surgery?" Leah smiled, though her eyes revealed a complex mixture of emotions. "Aunt Tanya, every moment I spend here reminds me why I did this. I can't just lie still that there's too much at stake." "No one will tell me how Dad is doing," she said, her eyes holding an unspoken question. Tanya squeezed Leah's hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "Right now, focus on taking care of your body. You are strong, brave, and truly amazing." A few days later, true to her promise, Leah took her first steps in the hospital corridor, supported by a nurse. Each step was a challenge, but she refused to surrender to weakness. Other patients and visitors watched with admiring eyes as she slowly but steadily made her way forward, her face a mask of concentration and determination. An elderly gentleman in a wheelchair offered quiet applause as she passed. "That's the spirit, young lady. Show them what you're made of," he encouraged. Leah's grateful smile lit up her face as she felt strength surge through her body like a warm current. She turned to the nurse, her eyes sparkling with determination. "I think I can go a little further. Could we try visiting Dad?" But the doctor firmly declined, insisting she needed to focus on her own recovery first. In the days that followed, Leia's recovery continued at an astonishing pace, amazing everyone around her. She followed her medication schedule and exercise routine with military precision, constantly pushing her boundaries like a determined athlete. During one rehabilitation session, she managed to complete exercises typically reserved for patients weeks further along in their recovery. The impressed physical therapist remarked, "Leia, in all my years, I've never seen anyone bounce back from this surgery so quickly." Breathless but satisfied, Leia responded with quiet determination. "Well, I have powerful motivation. Every step I take, every exercise I complete brings me closer to reclaiming my life. And this time, I'm ready for whatever comes my way." Her expression grew more serious as she explained. The physical therapist nodded in understanding, recognizing that Leia's strength came not just from her body, but from an unshakable resolve deep within her soul. But unbeknownst to her, Leia remained unaware of what was happening to her father in the next room. Dr. Davis frowned at Thomas's latest test results like a man reading storm clouds. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Just days ago, the post-transplant progress had looked promising. But now, the numbers before him told a different, alarming story. He turned to the head nurse, his voice tense with worry. "Get the team in here immediately and increase Mr. Miller's monitoring. I want readings every hour," he ordered anxiously. The nurse nodded quickly and left the room with swift efficiency. Dr. Davis turned his attention to Thomas, who lay unconscious in the sterile hospital room, his breathing labored and irregular, like a flickering candle in a storm. "What's happening, Thomas?" the doctor whispered, his voice heavy with concern. "Why is your body rejecting a perfectly matched kidney?" The next few hours became a whirlwind of chaos, as specialists rushed in and out of Thomas's room like actors in a tragic play. Each expert offered their theories and suggestions, but none could fully explain the sudden decline that had gripped their patient like a merciless hand. The monitors sang their relentless symphony of beeps and alarms, recording every fluctuation in Thomas's already precarious vital signs. Dr. Davis considered every possibility, no matter how unlikely, as if piecing together a complex puzzle. During a brief respite from the discussions, he gazed at Thomas's pallid, motionless face, etched with the shadows of past mistakes. "You must get better, Thomas," he whispered with fierce determination. "Don't give up now. Your daughter never abandoned you, even when you needed her most. Get well and make things right." The doctor understood the complicated family dynamics all too well, having witnessed their emotional conversations before the surgery. Meanwhile, in her recovery room, Leia noticed the unusual commotion in the hallway, her heart sensing the approaching storm. Medical staff rushed past her door, their faces tight with tension and worry, like harbingers of unwelcome news. Her heart began to race in her chest, as dark premonitions clouded her mind. Summoning all her strength, she rose from her bed, ignoring the protest of pain in her abdomen. With cautious steps, she made her way to the door, determined to uncover the truth that hung heavy in the air. In the hallway, she caught the arm of a passing nurse, her voice trembling with desperation. "Please, what's happening?" "It's about my father, isn't it?" The nurse hesitated, clearly struggling with how much information to share. Leia gripped the woman's arm tighter, her eyes pleading more eloquently than words ever could. "Please, I need to know," she implored, her voice barely above a whisper. The nurse sighed, surrendering to the intensity in Leia's gaze. "Your father isn't responding well," she explained softly, her voice trailing off as she tried to cushion the blow. Leia felt her world crumbling, the nurse's words echoing in her ears like distant thunder. She leaned against the wall, fighting waves of dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. This couldn't be happening, not after everything they'd been through, not after all she had sacrificed. With newfound determination, Leia straightened her spine, steel entering her voice. "Take me to my father," she demanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. The nurse hesitated once more, but sensing something in Leia's determined stance, she finally relented. Together, they walked slowly towards Thomas's room, each step echoing like distant thunder in the sterile corridor. As they approached, Leia could hear the muffled sounds of urgent voices mingling with the irregular beeping of monitors, a discordant symphony of crisis. She paused at the doorway, taking a deep breath like a diver preparing to plunge into dark waters. When she entered the room, the gravity of the situation struck her like a physical blow. Thomas lay surrounded by machines, a web of tubes and cables connecting to every visible part of his body. His skin had taken on an ashen hue, his breathing shallow and erratic. Dr. Davis noticed her presence and approached with concern etched on his face, his white coat a stark contrast against the dim room. "Leia, you shouldn't be here. You need rest," he said, but she brushed his words aside. Her eyes remained fixed on her father's fragile form, drinking in every detail of his condition. "What's happening, doctor? Why is he getting worse?" she asked, her voice barely containing her fear. The doctor sighed deeply, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration that spoke volumes. "To be honest, Leia, we don't know. His body appears to be rejecting the kidney, but we can't understand why. We're trying everything, but..." His voice trailed off, the unspoken implications hanging heavy in the air. Leia felt tears welling in her eyes, but forced them back, like pushing against a rising tide. She moved to the bedside and took Thomas's cold hands in both of hers, as if trying to transfer her own warmth into his still form. "Listen to me, Dad," she whispered fiercely. "You don't have permission to give up. I've already lost too much, Mom, when I was young, you when you pushed me away, and yes, you know about Samantha just months ago. I can't lose anyone else." As doctors continued their desperate battle to save Thomas, Leia remained by his side like a tireless sentinel. Her own strength of will served as a beacon of hope in the darkness that threatened to engulf them. As time crept by with agonizing slowness, Leia maintained her vigil at Thomas's bedside. His condition continued to deteriorate, each hour seeming to drain more life from his exhausted body. The once bustling hospital room had fallen into a heavy silence, broken only by the monotonous beeping of monitors. Leia watched every slight movement of her father's sleeping form, every fluctuation on the machine's graphs, desperately searching for signs of improvement. She held his cold, unmoving hand in hers, as if through touch alone she could transmit her own life force into him. Nurses came and went quietly, adjusting equipment and checking vital signs with mechanical efficiency. Leia barely noticed their presence, her attention focused entirely on Thomas. "Dad, you have to fight," she whispered close to his ear. "We were never good at communicating, but now I need you to hear me and fight." Dr. Davis entered the room, his face showing professional resolve that barely masked the disappointment beneath. He studied the charts with furrowed brows before turning to Leia, his face a mask of professional concern. "We're trying a new combination of medications. It's experimental at this stage." His voice trailed off, heavy with tension and unspoken possibilities. Leia nodded, understanding the weight of what remained unsaid. The doctor personally administered the new medication, adjusting the four with meticulous care. Leia watched the transparent liquid flow through the tubes, imagining it as her father's literal lifeline. "Doctor, what if? What if this doesn't work?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper in the sterile air. "Then we keep trying. We don't give up on him. I promise you that, Leia," Dr. Davis responded with unwavering determination. The next few hours were an emotional roller coaster for Leia, each tiny fluctuation in Thomas's vital signs sending waves of hope or despair through her heart. She clung to every positive sign, no matter how small. During one particularly dark moment, when the monitors erupted in a chorus of alarms, Leia felt her heart stop. A team of nurses rushed into the room, working frantically around Thomas. Leia was gently but firmly moved away from the bed, forced to watch helplessly as they fought to stabilize her father. "Not now, Dad. Be strong," Leia whispered, tears finally breaking free like a dam bursting. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, Thomas's vital signs began to stabilize. His erratic heartbeat steadied, and his blood pressure normalized like a storm, gradually calming. The medical team exchanged cautiously optimistic glances. Exhausted from the emotional upheaval, Leia collapsed into the chair beside the bed. She took Thomas's hand again, surprised to feel it slightly warmer to her touch. As she watched, she noticed a slight tremor in Thomas's eyelids, so subtle it might have been missed by less vigilant eyes. "Dad? Dad, can you hear me?" Leia called softly, leaning closer. After a moment of silence, Thomas's fingers moved ever so slightly in her grasp. Dr. Davis returned, his face showing signs of fatigue but his eyes gleaming with hope. After checking the monitors and making notes in the chart, he turned to Leia with a small smile. "Your father's a fighter, it seems. The new medication appears to be working. He's still critical, but he's showing responses we haven't seen before," he said. Leia felt a wave of relief wash over her, tempering her hard-learned caution with fragile hope. Though she knew there was still a long road ahead, for the first time in days, she allowed herself to feel a genuine glimmer of hope. "Thank you, Doctor, for not giving up on him," Leia said. Her voice was filled with emotion. "This is teamwork, Leia," Dr. Davis replied gently. "His determination, your selfless gift, our medical team, we're all playing our parts in this battle." Days passed slowly, each one bringing small improvements to Thomas's condition, like spring slowly awakening after a harsh winter. Having fully recovered from her own surgery, Leia divided her time between vigilant bedside watches and brief, enforced rest periods. On the morning of the 5th day since the crisis, Leia was jolted awake from her uncomfortable sleep in the armchair by sudden movement. She opened her eyes, blinking away the cobwebs of sleep. Then her heart nearly stopped as she watched Thomas stir and slowly open his eyes, like curtains rising on a new dawn. She leaped up, approaching the bed with a mixture of hope and anxiety swirling in her chest. "Dad, you're finally awake," Leia called softly, her voice trembling. Thomas blinked several times before his eyes finally focused on Leia's face, like a camera finding its subject. "Leia," he whispered, his voice rusty from disuse, like an old gate creaking open. "Leia," Thomas began again, his voice laden with emotion like a storm cloud heavy with rain. "I don't deserve to be here. You don't deserve to be here either. But I don't know how much time I have left, so I need to say everything." Leia felt a lump form in her throat as she watched her father struggle with his emotions, like a man wrestling with his own shadows. She couldn't find words to answer him. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength like a runner before a race. Then he began to speak, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Leia, my daughter. I've failed you in every way possible. That day I threw you out, I didn't just fail as a father, I betrayed everything fatherhood means. I was so obsessed with success and perfect grades that I forgot what truly mattered. You, my amazingly brave daughter." He paused, struggling to control his voice. "I have regretted that moment for the past 7 years. I wished I could turn back time, but I was too cowardly to try to fix what I broke. And now, here you are, saving my life after everything I've done. I don't deserve your kindness, Leia. But if I can get through this, I plead for a chance to become the father you deserve. I want to be a father who supports your dreams, not one who imposes my own on you. I know that words alone can't erase years of pain. But if you give me the opportunity, I will strive to atone for it for the rest of my life. I want to become a person worthy of the love and compassion you've shown me today." Leia listened in silence, quiet tears trailing down her cheeks. Each of Thomas's words was like a knife reopening old wounds, but also bringing long-awaited relief. She wanted to scream, to embrace him, to run away. All the conflicting emotions battled within her like opposing armies on a battlefield. "Dad," Leia finally spoke, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can forget, but maybe we can start over," she whispered, each word weighted with possibility. Thomas nodded, his eyes a storm of gratitude and regret. That's more than I deserve, and I promise you, I won't waste this chance. The silence that followed was broken by Dr. Davis's arrival, announced by a gentle clearing of his throat. Mr. Miller, Leah, I know there's much to discuss, but now that Thomas is awake, we need to run some tests. Leah nodded and stepped back, but Thomas reached out, grasping her hand like a drowning man clutching a lifeline. Leah, please. Don't go, Thomas pleaded, fear dancing clearly in his eyes. I know I have no right to ask. I'm here, Leah responded softly, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. We'll get through this together now. While Dr. Davis conducted his examination, Leah studied her father as if seeing him for the first time in years. The worry lines etched in his face, the silver threads at his temples were testament to time's passage and regret's heavy toll. Thomas watched her intently with every blink, as if she might disappear. When the examination was complete, the doctor smiled with satisfaction. You're progressing well, Mr. Miller, Dr. Davis reported. There's still a long road ahead, but you're going to be fine. Thomas nodded, his attention still fixed on Leah. Thank you, doctor. For everything. As the doctor left the room, father and daughter were alone again, 7 years of separation hanging between them like a heavy curtain. Leah pulled her chair closer to the bed, settling beside Thomas. The silence was thick with unspoken words and contained emotions, like air before a storm. Leah began to speak. But Thomas spoke first, his voice stronger now, like polished steel. I know it's impossible to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm proud of you. Not because of me, but in spite of me, proud of the strong, compassionate woman you've become. Leah felt tears welling in her eyes again. It was hard, Dad, so incredibly hard. But maybe, step by step, we can rebuild our family, though I won't accept being abused or dismissed ever again. Thomas nodded. His expression showed deep understanding and acceptance. The weeks following Thomas's discharge became a delicate period of adjustment for father and daughter. Leah rented a small apartment near Thomas's house, allowing her to help with his recovery while maintaining the emotional distance she still needed. The first visits were brief and tense, filled with awkward silences and superficial conversation, like strangers trying to find common ground. However, as time passed, small changes began to blossom. Thomas, determined to keep his promise, made constant efforts to connect with Leah, asking about her work, interests, and hopes for the future, all the things he'd never bothered to know before. Leah, too, began sharing fragments of her life, testing the waters of this new relationship like a cautious swimmer. Hey, Dad, Leah said one day while helping Thomas with his rehabilitation exercises, I'm thinking about going back to school. I've always wanted to be a social worker. Thomas paused, gazing at her with a mixture of surprise and pride. That's wonderful, Leah. You'll make an amazing social worker, he said softly. Leah recognized this as major progress, knowing the old Thomas would never have approved of such a career choice. As months passed, wounds began to heal. Conversations flowed more easily, and silences lost their heavy weight. Thomas learned to listen, truly listen, as Leah shared stories of her struggles and triumphs during their years apart. Leah, in turn, began to see beyond the authoritarian figure who had dominated her childhood to the changed, repentant man before her. Nearly a year after the transplant, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Leah arrived at Thomas's house bubbling with exciting news. Dad, I got accepted into the social work program, she exclaimed, her face glowing like a sunrise. Thomas embraced her with tears in his eyes. I'm so proud of you, daughter. So very proud, he whispered. They fell silent for a moment, Leah's words hanging in the air like a promise of better days to come. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a breathtaking palette of oranges and pinks. This was a sight the two had witnessed countless times before, but now it shimmered with new, profound meaning. You know, this past year has taught us both so much, Leia said softly, a small smile playing on her lips. Thomas nodded, returning her smile. Yes, we've learned, and we'll keep learning, together. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening heavens, father and daughter stood side by side. Their silence was filled with a comfortable understanding, a renewed hope sparkling between them. The road ahead was long, at times treacherous. But buoyed by the rediscovered love and the promise of a fresh start, they were united, resolute in facing whatever challenges lay in wait. Night fully descended, cloaking them in its peaceful embrace. Leia gazed at her father, feeling a sense of homecoming she hadn't known in so very long. It wasn't a perfect ending. Life so rarely provided such tidy conclusions. But this is a new beginning, brimming with possibilities, a pledge of brighter days to come. And for now, that is more than enough. If you've enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support fuels our passion to bring you uplifting tales nearly every day. Don't miss the next captivating story about to unfold on your screen. You can now click the link displayed to access a curated selection of compelling narratives and guaranteed entertainment just for you. We'll see you there.